Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we have Blue Carreker in the studio with us. Blue is from Citizens Action of New York, and we're going to be talking about the New York State Paid Family Leave Campaign. Blue, welcome to North Country Matters. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Donna.
Well, you know, you and I worked on the Paid Family Leave campaign, although not side by side, but all through telephone conference calls
and emails,
social media, and all that kind of stuff. So it's good to get a sense of that campaign because it was a successful one, and it's going to make a big impact on people's lives, isn't it?
It has the potential to have a huge impact. We really want to make sure that people use it.
That's right, and so we're the campaign was in three phases. It was getting the bill passed, and then it was getting the regulations to support the bill passed, and now we're in the education phase where we'll actually be telling people what their rights are and letting businesses know what their responsibilities are under it. So before we get started on that, let's give everybody a little background on what Citizen Action of New York is, what it does, how it operates, and the kinds of issues that you take up.
Okay. So Citizen Action of New York is a C4 organization. It partners with another organization called the Public Policy and Education Fund, which is a C3. What do those terminations mean? So they're both nonprofit organizations, both working in the public good and working on issues of environmental, economic, racial justice issues. The C4 arm is primarily a lobbying arm, so that people who are employed in that part of the agency spend a lot of time at the Capitol in New York State, and we focus on New York State legislation and policy. And the Public Policy and Education Fund, the C3, has restrictions. That's why it's tax exempt, and so we don't do as much direct lobbying. We do a lot of education of people around these issues.
Right, and that's true of a lot of organizations. In fact, AUW is a C3, except for our lobby corps, which is a C4 part of it, so that we do have the ability to do that kind of talking to members of Congress and helping folks understand what those issues are. So it's an interesting mix sometimes when you have one organization, but they have two divergent arms.
It's necessary to track funding and make sure that we're obeying all the regulations and laws on lobbying in New York State, which are significant. Anyway, the work that we do, we have small offices in New York City, in the Hudson Valley, in the Capital Region, and in Buffalo. And we have sister organizations in Rochester and Long Island. And at each of those locations, we're involved in what we call the three faces of power. So primary work is educating people about laws and policies that do impact the issues we were just talking about. Trying to identify and grow leadership development. So first phase of power is legislation and policy. Second is growing the capability of people to be engaged in that process. So we do a lot of canvassing, identification of volunteers, providing those volunteers with leadership skills, and helping them find out how to engage in our democracy and make change. And third phase of power is really cultural. How do you change the norms around these issues? So you can change a law, but that doesn't necessarily change behavior. So, you know, we'd like to do more in that area. That's the long-term struggle. Right.
So one of the keys, I think, to what you said is the second piece, which is building capacity and giving people the tools they need to be successful as participatory citizens, which is something we talk a lot about here on North Country Matters. And we've seen a lot of organizations and a lot of people get involved in the last few months in public policy and in what's going on in government in a way that we haven't seen for some cases for decades.
Oh, it's exciting time.
It is exciting, but a lot of those people are new to this process, so they need that kind of help in understanding how to be effective, don't they?
Right.
So that's where organizations like yours can be such a...
Weekly meetings and getting people into different committees and task force and making sure each of those people getting the skills that they need and to work on the issues that are important to them.
Exactly. So let's also, Blue, just take a minute. Tell folks a little bit about your own background. You've been doing this work for your whole adult life, basically.
Right.
And
Right.
why are you such a passionate advocate for social justice?
Oh, well, you know, our origins are always very interesting, and I certainly probably have to credit my mother, who was pretty eccentric and strong individual for her time. She was lieutenant in the WACs. She was a barnstormer for the British Ambulance Corps. She was a parole officer in New Orleans, a very independent traveling person until I think she got married and settled down in her 30s. So. She died 10 years ago at 93. So, you know, she had a very long, active life and encouraged, of course, independence and education and civic participation among all her children.
And modeled it with her own life as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So even when she settled down, she was always active in community life.
Right.
So that was a part of my growing up. And then, of course, I graduated in '69, so I grew up in that time of very social upheaval and lots of participation and activity and change and civil rights and Vietnam era war and all of that. So, you know, that was my significant, you know, late teens and early 20s years was all around that. So,
and like so many people from that generation, that became your career path.
That's right. I did actually graduate with a communications degree, thinking that I was going to go into broadcast journalism. And I went out and spent some time in California with a friend who was in one of the first evening magazines for television. And I spent a couple days and I said, nope, this is not for me. This is cutthroat. And I don't like the environment. So at that time, my mother had had a flu and overnight lost hearing in one of her ears and part in the other. I went into an agency that serves the deaf and hard of hearing, asking about information for her, and they had a sign up for an internship, paid internship in media and public relations.
The rest
I
is
applied,
history.
and the rest is history. I've been in nonprofits ever since.
Yeah, that's a great start to a very active career. So our focus today is on the Paid Family Leave campaign here in New York State. So give us a quick overview of how that campaign got started, how you built the coalition around it, and to get the enabling legislation that passed last year. This, like so many other issues, was anything but an overnight success, was it?
No, very definitely not. And I think what we often say is it's a combination of preparation and luck. All right, so you have to be prepared for the right moment when it comes along, and that's really what happened here. So you had a campaign. There were people working on paid family leave for almost a decade, and that was championed in the Assembly of New York and introduced 5 or 6 times over that period, but never passed in the Senate and never really gained momentum. But there was a coalition that had formed, and there was a number of groups who were doing research, polling, who were helping develop and monitor the policies that were being passed in other states and talking with legislators about that. So they were finessing the legislation, figuring out what might be able to go through, how to structure it. I came in the last 2 years of the campaign, and at that point we were seeing that luck part of things come together. So what was that? That was, first of all, New Jersey had passed paid family leave, a neighboring state. That begins to put some pressure on the business environment. De Blasio in New York City and Cuomo were developing a little bit of a rivalry, and de Blasio was passing paid sick days, and that was creating an opening.
And one of the things that we know is that when something happens in New York City, that affects 40% of the population of this state. So all of a sudden you have tremendous pressure from everybody else to say, how come they get it and we don't?
Right. And a good coalition came together around that. And then you had the corruption scandals in the legislature. So that toppled the leadership in both the Assembly and the Senate, and gave an opening to, you know, kind of move in as we wanted to move some legislation. Okay, maybe we can change some things here. So
it broke that dynamic of those locks that had been on both of those houses for years and years and years in some cases.
that's right.
And the new leaders probably wanted some things to make them look good, and these were not easy wins, but they were places to go that would have a big impact, that would make a lot of people sit up and take notice.
That's right. And so coming in the last 2 years, it was clear there was an opening coming. We needed to work fast and hard, and we needed to bring in the partners who could make the campaign successful. All right, so we talked recently about how you structure a campaign there and finding out who you need to move. You know, we had about 12 legislators in the Senate that we knew we had to move. We had the governor that we knew we had to get on board. So who are the people that they listen to, who most influence them? How do you get out the grassroots and the voters who are going to influence the people you have to move? So that's what those last 2 years were about. We were able to get some funding in for the National Organization of Family Values at Work. That was very critical. We were able to pay a lobbyist. We were able to pay me, a grassroots organizer for the whole of upstate New York. And we were able to pay for some expert communications time. So all those things were important. So that came together. We immediately broadened our coalition. We have a steering committee that I said had good policy people on it, good data research people, and some people with labor connections in New York City. So those were on the ground. Now we needed more grassroots capacity, and we needed more representation from the diversity of groups who would be impacted by paid family leave.
Right.
So who's that? We need who's working with parents, who's working on child health, who's working with seniors, who's working with the families of people who have serious illnesses. All right, we need to get some of those key organizations on board and part of this steering committee. So those were the steps we really had to take to get lined up. And once we had those steps in place, we, were able to really pull together a very strong campaign.
Well, one of the things that I noticed from sitting on the steering committee phone calls and listening to a lot of those players as they talked was what a good job the campaign did of pulling together people from across the spectrum. It wasn't just new parents. It wasn't just people with kids in school who might need after-school care. You went very heavily into the elder and senior care because that, as we know, with an aging population, and particularly as the baby boomers age, they are now dealing with their parents and the needs that their parents have, who are living longer than ever. So getting that incredibly important elder care piece of the coalition was really significant, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that, as you said, so on the one hand, seniors and families dealing with the sandwich generation,
right.
Mothers who are women particularly, because they're our primary caregivers, who have older parents who are beginning to have health issues, and young children, trying to balance that. People who work directly with young infant health, and so nurses and doctors, and people in labor, because they have large numbers of people that they can turn out and get engaged.
Right, and these are folks who are working in healthcare organizations, so they're directly seeing what the needs are.
Right, so the Nurses Association was very important.
Right.
The American Academy of Pediatrics was really important. And churches, faith institutions got very involved.
And that's one of the things that we've seen, especially in the last few months, is how many faith-based organizations, there are the Moral Mondays and the things like that, they have really started to turn out on these social issues, haven't they, all across the country, not just here in New York.
No, very, very true.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what the key parts of the paid family leave legislation are, and what's the timetable for full implementation?
Sure. So we passed the bill last year as part of the budget. Governor Cuomo was an important part of that win, and that it was important to get him on board and have him become the cheerleader. Governor Cuomo often likes to phase in things like this that affect businesses, so he's done that with the final legislation when they negotiate it out. So it begins implementation January 1st of 2018, so we're less than 9 months away. We just started a campaign that said New York is expecting, because
which again is great. It's a great visual. It's a great social media tool for educating people,
right,
isn't it? Because as this 9 months slowly goes down to the end, you can continue to generate great material for educating folks.
Right. No, it's a fun campaign. So it will start. The basic components that we won are up to 12 weeks when it's fully implemented of paid job protected leave to welcome a new child, and that's not just moms, it's moms and dads. It's adopted or foster care children.
It's families of any stripe. It isn't
That's
just.
Right.
It isn't just.
Regardless of gender.
That's right.
So all of that, it is also to take care of a seriously ill family member. That includes mental health as well as physical health issues and problems. And to prepare for the deployment of a family member into the military.
And that's really something that is pretty unique, isn't it? Because that's not something that people usually think about, but anybody who's been through that process, there's a lot to do to get a family ready to send somebody off. And we know from our experiences right here in the North Country with Fort Drum, sometimes it's both mom and dad are being deployed at the same time, so they have to make a lot of arrangements for the guardianship of their kids and do all kinds of things to get ready to do that. It's not just sometimes a single family member.
Very true. And the other part of it that I found really resonated for many military families, especially in the North Country, is the fact that you don't have to take this all at once or even a week at a time. You can break it down into days. So my understanding is, for instance, there are a lot of veterans that have to go for medical appointments down to Syracuse, or for different treatment programs or services that they need that are health related. May have to go really long distances to get that done, and somebody often has to take them there or go with them. And so people have to get the time off of work to do that.
That's
and
right.
That's very difficult. Transportation
is always a barrier here in the North Country and in lots of other parts of rural New York State. So it is something that we do need to make plans for when we're making these kinds of trips, as you say.
All right, so we have those elements. It applies to almost all private sector employees. There are a few populations that are carved out. Farm workers always get carved out.
Right.
Unfortunately, clergy often get carved out. They have special circumstances. The biggest population that's carved out is public sector employees, and that includes teachers.
Right.
And that was really a decision by the public sector unions that they wanted to handle it within their contract negotiations. But otherwise, it doesn't matter the size of your business. In fact, people who self-insure, who are single-owner businesses, can opt in and actually participate in the insurance program. The program is paid for by the employees themselves.
It's a form of insurance, isn't
Right.
it? Like a lot of other kinds of programs that we have here in New York State.
Exactly. It's run similar to the temporary disability insurance program. So starting around July, we don't know the exact date yet or the exact amount, but we're expecting somewhere between $1 and $1.50 will begin to come out of employee checks.
And that's per week, so that's a very modest amount of money, and yet down the road, if you need to take some of this time off, it's going to mean an awful lot to you because your paycheck will not be reduced to zero by any means.
Right. So right now, before paid family leave, some people were able to access the Federal Medical Leave Act, FMLA, right? And that's totally unpaid. And it only applies to workers at companies who have 50 or more employees. So obviously a lot of people don't qualify for that. And in New York, you had temporary disability insurance, which was available just for moms to recover from pregnancy. and that only pays $170 a week. So it's really increasingly difficult for people to take
And
that.
that amount was actually set back in the late 80s.
1989.
1989, and has never been addressed.
No, and
so
it's still there. It's still
Yeah.
a ridiculously small amount of money.
right, it probably looked pretty good in 1989, but in 2017, it's a little bit under the current scale.
Right. So I talked about this rolling out. Next year, in January 1st, what will happen is that families, or workers will be able to take 8 weeks, and they'll get a benefit of 50% of their average weekly wage. And then the next year it goes up to 10 weeks, and I think it's 60% or something. It goes up. And after 4 years, it will be 12 weeks at 67%. So
Right.
2/3 of
So-
your average weekly wage.
The key to that is that it will be, it's not a dollar amount, but it's a percentage amount. So as your income grows, so will that amount of money. So it will be a benefit that actually is helping to meet current needs, no matter when it is.
Right, and there is a cap on it. It's capped at 2/3 of the average weekly wage across the state. So that means that your higher income earners, may at some point reach that
Right.
cap,
Right.
but you're covering your lower.
Exactly, and those are always the people who are most in need and the most, who find it the hardest to take these benefits because their salary is so critical to their family's economic
Yep.
success.
Now you will have to work, full-time workers have to work for 6 months before. That means they have to be contributing to the system, not necessarily for the same employer. They just have to be contributing
Right.
to the system. Part-time workers, I think it's 170 hours or something. There's a specific number of hours. And even if you're kind of this contract person who works for this company and then works for that company and things like, there's ways to qualify.
Good. So they've thought about some of those combinations that people are often working now. You just don't go to one 40-hour
Right.
week job. Sometimes you have to balance 2 or 3 jobs to come up with full-time work.
Right.
Good.
So, one of the important things is right now, if you're pregnant right now and expecting a child, you will be able to take paid family leave come January next year. Even if you deliver in August, September, as long as it's within a year of that birth, you can take that time. So people can start to plan for that
That's
now.
right, that's right. But of course, passing a bill into law is only part of the battle, isn't it? Just as important is the regulatory framework and also the administrative tools so that businesses need to know what their responsibilities are and workers need to know what their rights are under that. So how is this process for putting that regulatory framework? Is that pretty well set now, or is there still some work to go?
It's in the process.
Okay.
So there's an office now at the state level within workman's comp and stuff that's devoted to this. And they have set up a website and they've set up a hotline number. So those things are now functional. The director of that program is starting to do programs and speeches. And my understanding is they're developing materials that will be able to be downloaded. Last week, for the first time, I saw that the chamber and a private law firm are offering a program for businesses in the capital region. So I think that's starting up around
And those
the
will
area.
be good models for other parts of the state to pick up and use. won't they?
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
And our campaign, those people who are still remaining with the campaign, we're involved in doing 2 kinds of presentations. So we're doing meetings with what we call gatekeeper organizations. So we might meet in a region with key people involved in healthcare, and particularly prenatal care, but healthcare overall, and have meetings to discuss how within each of their networks they would reach people with this information and what kind of materials in what form would be most helpful to them to get this word out.
Because you really have to target those education materials to the industry and to the workers who are in that industry, don't you, in order to
Right.
be successful?
Right, and they'll be in a number of different languages, and we need to look at that, where it is throughout the state. And the other thing we're doing is doing discussions with groups of low-wage workers, because we feel that that's going to be the hardest group to reach. So having focus groups with 10 or 15 low-wage workers in different regions and asking them, you know, what do you think of this material? How would you like to get it? What questions would you have? What would make you concerned about using this? Would you use it?
Yeah, what are your barriers in your field?
Right, exactly.
Right.
So, so we're involved in all those things, plus doing things like social media campaigns.
Exactly. So that education piece is well underway and will continue, and not just at the end of this year, because there'll still be phase-in materials, so you'll continue to educate people.
Yeah.
But in order for paid family leave to be a real success, it's going to take, as you mentioned in your third power shift, it's going to take a cultural shift.
Yes.
What needs to happen in order to make paid family leave fulfill the potential that it has, and what would that look like, you know, on the ground, in families and in workplaces, if we really got that cultural shift that we're talking about?
Well, I think you have to go back to why did we really want paid family leave? One reason is because the fact that we don't have paid family leave drives families into poverty. Women who have to take time off and can't find affordable child care, or, you know, just need to recover, you know, they are forced, those families are often forced into debt because that person is not working, or that person has no income. Women who have problems during pregnancy, women who give birth prematurely, that extends that time and creates huge financial hardships for families. Secondly, we know that young children and seniors benefit medically and mentally from the provision of this care. So early babies, what happens in the first 6 months of that baby's life is hugely impactful. All of those brain synapses are having incredible electrical activity in the brain of a young child. And if that child has a stable, secure environment and an ability to bond with a parent, that has long-range implications for their ability to socialize, to learn. So it can have long ramifications. So we want, and we know there are many good reasons, to have someone at home in those first months to provide as stress-free an environment as possible, to allow a mother to breastfeed. All those things mean that down the road, that child has a much better chance of succeeding. Similarly, people coming out of the hospital and trying to recover from illnesses, we know now that if there's a family member at home to help them in that early transition, to set up the care, again, to provide that home environment, that the recovery is faster and often more complete. So important health outcomes. And finally, women's economic equality.
And security.
And security
yes.
can really be impacted here. Women carry a burden of caregiving. We talked about how it's primarily women doing this caregiving. So what does that mean? It means women lose lifetime earnings from all those times they've taken off work. They get off the, you know, kind of a ladder at their business. Business does not take them as seriously because they say, oh, eventually, because she's a woman, she's going to be taking time off to care. All those things begin to impact and have a very real impact on women's equality and the workplace and income. So if we can get men to participate in the caregiving, if we can change that workplace environment so both women and men take time, it will help the children. Men who are involved with babies stay involved with their kids all through life. They have much better life outcomes if they're involved in caregiving. And you then begin to narrow that wage gap, that attitude gap, that gender gap that happens in the workplace. But that's not an easy change to accomplish.
No, it isn't. But one of the things right now that we know is that men who do take paternity leave and who do become caregivers, often when they go back into the workplace are looked at through a very different lens than when they were on the track of, you know, working the 60-hour week and not worrying about anything except work. And so when we change that cultural expectation, then we stop penalizing people for being good human beings, don't we?
Right. That's right. And I would love to see a campaign that talks about CEOs and managers taking advantage of paid family leave, because
Exactly.
they have to set the standard,
Right.
and they have to change the environment of the workplace.
That's right, and we've seen a few industries where that's starting to happen, and when it does, they become family-friendly workplaces. And family-friendly workplaces breed very loyal workers. There's a
Absolutely.
huge, the Iron Workers Union just negotiated 6 months of maternity leave for their women iron workers, and the reason that they did that is because they've got so much invested in these people and in training, they don't want to lose them. And if you treat these people right, you give them the time they need to take care of their family responsibilities, they come back, your costs are actually lower because you don't have to retrain somebody.
That's right.
So there's
That's
a
right.
lot of business incentive if you're a forward-thinking industry.
And certainly one of the reasons we were successful in our campaign to pass the legislation was advocacy on the part of small business owners who said, I want to be able to offer this benefit to my employees. As an individual business, I can't do that unless it's required across the board. But without it, I lose my employees to larger corporations who can offer these things. And I see the fact that if my employees inevitably something comes up like this.
Oh.
In one life or another it happens.
That's right.
And then I see them trying to struggle with this, and I try to help. I dig into my own resources, but it's just creates incredible stress.
We need institutional supports
Yes.
for this rather than individual supports for this. Well, Blue, thank you for coming in today. The paid family leave bill that New York State has is the best in the country right now. So we have become the model and the standard. And I know we're all looking forward to the day when it is fully implemented instead of just starting to get implemented, because we'll start to see some of those cultural shifts be in a position to start to happen. So thank you for coming in. It's been a great conversation, and we look forward to more successes on these very important worker issues.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Our time is up. Thank you. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, which is filmed here in the Potsdam Public Library's Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center. This show is a civic collaboration between the American Association of University Women here in St. Lawrence County and the St. Lawrence County branch of the League of Women Voters, as well as the Potsdam Public Library. Remember, until next time, our North Country Matters. Thank you. Thank you. Great job.